Hello everyone, this is Princess Tater. You probably know me from my husband's streams, Sweet Tea Killa. He does retro gaming, I do cooking. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna be doing fresh homemade bread. We're gonna get started by turning on our oven. So the oven is gonna be set at first to the lowest setting that your oven will go. Ours is 170 and it takes a minute for it to get where it needs to go. So give me just a sec. And you're gonna just turn that on long enough for it to preheat. You don't want it to get too hot because if you do, the yeast it'll completely kill the yeast off and your bread won't rise. It'll stay flat and dense and it's just not very good. So we're gonna head over to the kitchen sink right here. I'm gonna go on the hottest that it'll go. And again, that takes a couple seconds. And then you're gonna grab your liquid measuring cup. Liquid measuring cups and solid measuring cups are completely different. They measure differently. So if you are using a solid measuring cup, and by solid I mean like flour, sugar, rice, things like that, as opposed to liquids like obviously water, you're gonna get different measurements. So you really definitely need to get a liquid measuring cup. So anyway, make sure that your water is warm enough, and this one's nice and steamy. You don't want it too hot either, because again, your yeast will die. So you're gonna do 2 cups into a stand mixer or hand mixer. Your stand mixer or hand mixer will need to have dough hooks, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like as soon as I get over there. Your dough hook is this little wiggly looking one right here. And you are gonna need your cup later, so for oil, so just set it off to the side. But you just want something like this, that has a machine that has something like that to it. So you have your warm water, and now I'm gonna grab my sugar. And this is what I keep my sugar in. Any kind of sugar will work. I prefer organic sugar. That's just my preference. Like I said, any kind of sugar will work as long as it's granulated. So you're gonna want to do 2/3 of a cup of sugar in your water. So 2/3, this is 1/3 of a cup, solid measuring cup. I'm gonna put that back in. You're not gonna need your sugar again. So I'm going to set that off to the side over here, where I'm not gonna be doing very much of my work. So you're gonna want to take your whisk. It doesn't matter what kind of whisk, but you're gonna want to stir that until it's pretty well dissolved. You don't need it like super dissolved, but you do need it well enough to where like you can see it clear in the bottom. Now you're gonna wanna grab your dry active yeast, and it's gonna be 1.5 tablespoons of dry active yeast. Don't use the instant kind for this recipe because I've found that the instant kind doesn't let your bread rise well enough. It acts too fast and then your bread has big holes, or it just doesn't rise at all. So we're gonna do, this is 1/2 of a tablespoon. So you're gonna do 3 of those into the sugar water, and you're gonna sprinkle it. Can you come in, sweetie? Sweet Tea Killa is my cameraman today, so he is doing a fantastic job, but I am gonna have to kind of tell him where I need him to be because he's never done this with me before. So you're gonna want to put 3 of those into your mixer or your bowl if you're using a hand mixer. So take your whisk and kind of gently mix it as well as you can. Okay, and then you don't need your whisk again, so I'm gonna put that in the sink. And then, so this just preheated, so I'm gonna turn it off because it only needs to be about 80 degrees to 95 degrees for your bread to rise. That's kind of what you're looking for. But I am gonna turn the timer on to 5 minutes for the yeast to activate. So whenever the yeast is active, you will smell like a very yeasty, almost beer type of smell, because yeast is in fact what makes beer. We're gonna let this rise for a bit, or activate, and we'll be right back. Hello everyone, welcome back. It's been 5 minutes and you can very clearly see that something has happened here. This is what your yeast should look like. Apparently I was not saying yeast correctly enough for Sweet Tequila earlier, so sorry Sweet Tequila. So we are going to start adding some of our other ingredients, but first we need to put some of those ingredients together. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna get a dry liquid measuring cup, and I'm gonna dry that right now with my handy dandy little towel here. And the reason you want it dry is because obviously water and oil don't mix. And so this is for your oil. You're gonna do 1/4 cup. So you're just gonna pour that in till it reaches 1/4 cup. And you're gonna want to keep your oil handy because you're gonna need to oil your bowl after you knead your bread. So keep that handy. And then I'm gonna get a 1 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Had to remember which it was, teaspoon or tablespoon. It's a teaspoon though, guys. So teaspoon of salt, and I'm just gonna use regular iodized salt out of my salt shaker here. So you're gonna need, this is a half of a teaspoon. So it's gonna be 3 of these. So 3 half teaspoons, 2 and 3. And I'm just using a bowl to kind of show you guys. Normally I just put it right straight in the bowl. So you are gonna wanna do that. I'm just gonna put my salt back over here. So you have your salt and your oil. And the next thing you're gonna need is bread flour. So I prefer organic bread flour. I don't think it really matters what brand you use, but I prefer organic bread flour. Again, I like the organic stuff, that's just me. But any kind of bread flour will work. And I will link all of my ingredients, my recipes, and what I'm using here today in the description below the video so that you guys can go and like kind of find what you need for anything that I make today. So we are going to first, and this is in the way, sorry guys. First we're going to attach our dough hook. So there's not really a process to this, however your machine works. Mine just hooks on like that. And I have a bowl lift, so you have to lift it up. And some of my equipment back here is wanting to fall on me. So I just put it on the lowest setting, and you're gonna wanna get in here, Sweet Tequila. So I'm putting it on the lowest setting that my stand mixer will go. And I just pour the oil right in. And then pour in the salt. You don't have to do it any kind of special way, you just pour it in, okay? And then I'm just gonna put these in the sink because I'm not gonna need them again. And then I like to use 1/2 cup dry measuring cup, but you're gonna need 6 cups of bread flour. And you're just gonna put that in there. And I like to rotate which side I use because I feel like it gives it just a little bit of a more even mix. So that was 1, 1 1/2, 2, and I'm pretty sure that we will be speeding this up because it's not a very quick process. And you're gonna make a mess, just letting you know. Okay, that's 3 cups, and you can see that it's mounding inside of the bowl here. So you don't really want that. You want it to really get in there. So I just went up 1/2 speed, and mine goes, the first one goes 1/2 speed, and then it goes full, and then it just goes full speed. So you don't want to make your stand mixer or your hand mixer go any faster than 2. So that was 3 1/2, 4, 4 1/2, whoops, 5, and then 5.5, and 6. All right, and now I'm just gonna leave that in there and put my flour over here for just a minute. I am gonna move it back to my main working station, but I'm gonna come closer. I'm gonna go all the way up to 2, and you see how much faster that really gets that in there. And you're gonna want your dough to pull away from the bowl. See how it's pulling away now? It's not completely pulling away, but it's enough to where you can kind of see what's going on here. And we're just gonna let you watch that for just a second. And you see it kind of cleans itself up almost. There shouldn't be a ton left in the bowl whenever you're done, when you're ready to knead it. All right, so it's still pretty ragged, and it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but I'm gonna go ahead and back off and turn my mixer off and pull the bowl down. And you're gonna wanna take all of that dough and push it away from your dough hook, just like this. See, you can see the dough hook, and take the dough hook out if you have the same kind of mixer that I do. And so you're gonna wanna put that in the sink, and then pull your bowl. And I'm gonna come over here and grab my flour that I very much should have put over here instead of over there. So, and like I said, this is gonna be a messy process, so don't be surprised if your kitchen's a wreck whenever you get done. So lightly dust a very clean and dry surface. Again, you want dry because you don't want it to stick. So you take your dough out of the bowl by hand, and you are gonna have to scrape some of the dough out because it's gonna wanna stick. Okay, and you see like the bowl is pretty well clean. And so you're going to want to knead this, move that out of the way, with your hands until it's nice and springy and smooth. This can take anywhere between 5 minutes to 10 minutes, depending on if it's humid, or if your dough got enough flour, or if it's just being temperamental. Sometimes the bread doesn't turn out, and that's through no fault of your own. I've had dozens of loaves not turn out, and I've done everything right, and I'm sitting there thinking, what did I do? And the answer is nothing. You didn't do anything. You do have to be very careful when you're kneading the bread not to over flour it. I will say that, because it's very easy to put more flour down than you really need, because it does stick to your hands. And so you're thinking, oh, it's sticking to my hands, I should add more flour. Don't do that. Trust me, it becomes a really dense loaf that nobody wants to eat. So you're gonna wanna just make sure that it's nice and springy. If it does stick to your hands a little bit, that's okay. But if it's sticking to a lot, like you can't get it off like right here, then you don't really want to keep that bread. But then you can add extra flour and knead that in. I have had breads that on like rainy days just do not want to rise. I've had breads that on hot, humid, just sticky days that rise too much. And by too much, I mean like over the pans where I think it's gonna like explode. So yeah, and this is actually a very sticky loaf because it is a very humid day. It's been raining a lot. So that's why I'm having to add a little bit more flour than I normally would. Or if you're like me and forget how much flour you've added, you can also under add flour. So there's a lot of things that can happen to a bread loaf to make it not great. So here you have this loaf, this bread dough, and if you put your finger in it and it comes back, it springs back like this, See how it's, well, it was springing back. Let's try this again. There we go. See how it sprang back? That's what you're looking for. And it's smooth, it's springy, it feels airy. So that's exactly what you need. So now you're gonna wanna take a little bit of oil. I don't usually measure this part, but I think it's about 2 tablespoons of oil. But you just need enough to coat the bowl so that the dough doesn't stick to the bowl when it's rising. And you can use your hand for this. And all I'm doing is just twirling it around, but you can, like I said, you can use your hand. So just coat the bowl really good. And if you don't have enough oil, you can always add a little bit extra. So I'm gonna put my bread dough in, and I'm gonna swirl it and then flip it and swirl it again. Because you want that oil on your bread dough too, so it doesn't, again, stick to the bowl. So now I'm gonna just take a cover. This is just a fabric bowl cover. And you just put it over the bowl. And you're gonna wanna take this and put it in your warm oven. Remember we turned our oven on earlier to preheat, and then I told you to turn it off. This is why. Because I like to put my dough in the oven instead of on my oven top. So you're gonna wanna leave it in there for 1 hour. Whoops. Did a little too fast. 1 hour, and just leave it in there. Don't open your oven, because if you open your oven, you're gonna lose heat, and that yeast really needs time to activate and make your bread rise. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna clean up a little tiny bit and wash my hands, and I'm not gonna clean up my surface yet because I'm gonna have to knead my dough again. So I'm gonna leave that, any kind of like pieces of dough that maybe comes off on your hands, you do want to get that up because you don't want that in your newly risen bread. So anyway, we will be back in an hour.
1 hour later.
Hello everybody, welcome back. It has been an hour, so we're about to take our dough out of the oven from its first rise. And this dough does need to rise 2 times before it is ready. So we are going to knead our dough. So this is what it looks like. You want it to be risen, doubled in size for the first rise, and you see it's completely taken over the bowl. And so you take your fist and you gently push your dough down, and that's what it should look like. Oh. And then a little bit of flour, you don't need much. And you're gonna just take it out of the bowl. And then just scrape the sides of your bowl because you don't want to leave any of that yumminess behind. I'm just gonna put that in the sink because we don't need it anymore. So this one is a light knead. You don't need to knead it as much as you did the first time. And this time you are going to need to get your pans. I think my pans are 9 by 5 inch loaf pans, I believe. I'm not 100%, but I will put a link in the description for my pans. So this is a very quick knead, like I said, and so that's all you need to do to it. So what you're going to do now is take something that you can separate the bread with. You can use a knife or whatever. This is just a scraper. It came with my mixer, and it has been fantastic for separating the bread in 2. And if you want 2 loaves that are exactly the same, you can use a food scale. I don't use the food scale, but that's just because it's my preference. So I'm going to put 1 piece of bread in my bread pan just to rest for a minute. I'm gonna move my flour out of the way here because I need a lot of room. And then you're gonna wanna shape it into a rectangle roughly. Take a, I like the wooden ones, but a rolling pin of any kind. This is a what they call a French rolling pin because it doesn't have the handles. You just kind of use your hands to move it into directions. And you want to squeeze out some of those bubbles, and it's sticking a little. Some of those bubbles in your bread because you don't want hole pockets in your bread, and it's wanting to stick to my rolling pin because I'm not going as fast as I normally do, so you can kind of see the process. Okay, and I like this kind of rolling pin because I can do what I just did, like to the side with the ones with the handles. It's not as easy to do that. I've had both, and this one's my favorite. So you just make it a rectangle, so you stretch it out until it's a rectangle. And then whenever you get ready to roll it, you roll it like a sleeping bag. So you start at the bottom and you pull and then roll. And then you can pull and then roll. And you just roll it up like a sleeping bag as tightly as you can. And then you see the seam here. You're going to want to pinch that down until it's almost invisible. Like, it doesn't have to be invisible, but almost invisible. And then you want to take your ends and fold them under. I'm gonna actually flip it over and then fold those under with the seam. Same thing over here, and you'll have like a sausage like shape whenever you get done. And there are going to be a couple of bubbles. You're just gonna have to deal with that a little bit. And then I'm going to take my other side, take that out and lay it into my lined bread tin. So I have silicone liners, and for a long time I didn't have these. What they are is just, like I said, they're silicone, and they are to keep the bread from sticking to the bread pans. And you just fold them up like this, and you tuck them in, and just push, push, push. And whenever the bread comes out, it'll be so much easier to get them out of the pans than just greasing it. However, you can totally just grease the pan with vegetable like shortening, like Crisco or something like that. But I just found that this works better for me. So I'm gonna put that off to the side and do the same exact process that you did before in rolling your dough out. So I'm gonna do this quickly. I can since it's the second. Okay. Why is it boring?
You said the same process you did before.
Okay. Stretch out. 2x rectangle. And the rectangle doesn't have to be perfect. Just roll. All right. We have a seam here. Flip it over. Tuck it under. And until you have a general sausage shape. And then lay it pan. And then now you're going to want to take these back over to the oven. And you're going to set them back in the oven to rise for another 30 minutes. A lot of people like to put towels or something over the bread. I don't particularly do that. It's not something I really, do very often. What I'm doing here is I'm just going to raise the temperature a little bit in my oven because it cooled off a little too much. You don't have to do this, but I prefer to do it. And then you're not going to let it preheat the entire way. This is just to warm the oven up to that 80 to 95 degrees that you're going to want to keep that yeast active. Like I said, Sweet Tea Kill is getting on to me for saying yeast the wrong way. So I'm hoping I'm saying it the correct way. But anyway, you don't want to leave it on long, like I said, because it will kill your yeast. So I'm just going to turn that back off again. And so we're going to do 30 minutes on the timer and come back in 30 minutes and we'll see you then. Hello everyone, welcome back. So it has been 30 minutes for our loaves. Oh, I had to put that in the dirty clothes. It's been 30 minutes since we put our loaves into the oven for rise. And this is what they look like. They have doubled in size, as you can see. And so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna set our oven to bake at 350, and it has to preheat. Make sure you preheat your oven, because if you do not, then the bread will not bake the way it should. So I'm gonna leave these up here on top of the stove while it preheats, because it will continue to rise. So I'm gonna put this thin towel over it, tea towel, and just leave it there for until it's preheated. So whenever this preheat, we're gonna come back and we'll bake it, and I will show you the finished product. It is a 30-minute bake time. So once it's in the oven, you're gonna want to bake it for 30 minutes and then take it out of the oven. We'll be back. Alrighty, we are going to take our bread out of the oven now. It has been 30 minutes, and I'm actually gonna turn my oven off because we will not be needing it anymore. So make sure you have some good oven mitts to do this with. So here you have the first loaf, and I'm gonna have Sweet Tea kind of move out of the way for just a second, and the second loaf. And I had a lot of practice doing this, so if you don't feel comfortable doing this one-handed, I don't blame you. Okay, so what we're gonna do is immediately turn these out onto a bread baking rack, a cooling rack, and take that out, and we'll just set those in the sink. Turn your bread right side up. Okay, and you're gonna want to wear your oven mitts to do this because obviously the bread is extremely hot and you do not want to burn yourself. So make sure your oven mitts are nice and clean whenever you take the bread out. So you're gonna leave the bread here, and I'm gonna put my oven mitts back over here. And so you're gonna want to get a brush. I like the silicone brush. It just makes it a lot more simple to spread the butter onto the bread. And I just use a stick of butter, and you just brush your silicone brush into the butter. It's better if the butter is already soft a little bit because it gets on the brush a lot better. So you just want to brush this on. And the reason you want to brush it with butter or any kind of fat, really, you can use coconut oil, vegetable oil, margarine if you don't have anything else. I don't particularly like margarine, but you can use it, is to make sure that the bread stays soft. If you don't do this process, the bread will be very, very hard. It'll be hard to cut, and it'll be hard to like tear into pieces and make sandwiches with and things like this. So you definitely don't want to skip this process. And I'll kind of move it over so I can get into, because if you do, it will cause the bread to be, I guess, almost like stale. And that'll happen fairly quickly. Now, we are not going to show the process of like putting the bread up because it takes a really long time for the bread to completely, the internal temperature to come completely down so that you can do that. But whenever the bread is completely cool, like the internal temperature is completely cooled off and you can touch it, then you can wrap it in a plastic wrap, or I like to cut it up and put it in to Ziploc bags, like gallon Ziploc bags. If you have 2.5 gallon bags, that's even better because they fit a lot better in the 2.5 gallon bags. So I would definitely invest in some bread bags if you can. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So now all I'm gonna do is make sure I got all the spots. Put this in the sink, put my butter up, and we are done with the bread. As you can see, it's gonna just sit here and cool until it's completely cooled and I can put it away. But if you do put your bread into a silicone, or sorry, not silicone, cellophane, like clear plastic wrap or a bag, before it is completely cool, it will condensate and it'll get wet and soggy, and you don't want soggy bread. It's disgusting. So just make sure that it's very, very cool and done on the inside. So anyway, this is Princess Tater. I'm signing off, and see you next time. Have a good day.